That's the difficulty that the Eagles present, that it's not 5-0 by accident. And what they can do is put stress on you in a variety of ways.
One of my dearest friends, and I'll tell you, I love Brad Sham so much. He is, later on today, we're going to have another one of our friends, Merrill Reese, on with us at 5:30, the legendary voice of the Eagles too. And this rivalry goes back when Brad started as the voice of the Dallas Cowboys. Brad, I appreciate this. And why is this such a big game? This goes back to Dick Vermeil, Brad.
Well, the question is really, Danny, why are you saying this? But when Merrill comes on, you're going to say, he's your dear friend. We know what you do. We know how you are. I think that it's kind of hard for people to imagine what things were like literally decades and decades ago. So Dallas has been in a division with Washington, Philadelphia, and New York through several realignments. And obviously makes no geographical sense, but there's always been a great rivalry between Dallas and Washington. And then they all, Tom Landry had been with the Giants before he came to Dallas. So all three of those franchises have benefited from the rivalry one way or the other. And Dallas probably has too by tradition, but we're clearly lacking the geographical aspect. But the rivalry with the Eagles at the moment is the greatest because the Eagles are the best and have been the best. The Eagles, one of your old teammates, I believe, Michael Irvin. Didn't you play with Michael?
Yep.
When back in the 90s, when the late great Jerome Brown was playing for the Eagles, and Reggie White, and they were the only team I ever heard Michael say he was afraid of playing because he knew what he was getting into. And so it goes back. We're now 30 years ago, and it goes back before then, but it can ebb and flow. Depends on who's good at the moment. For the most part, certainly over the last decade, the Eagles, of the three Eastern teams that are actually in the East, the Eagles have been the best one. And if whatever Dallas wanted to do, they had to go through Philadelphia or vice versa. And so I think that has a lot to do with the rivalry. And you're right, Dick Vermeil. I'm so glad he's getting to go into the Hall of Fame. Dick was the Eagles head coach when they beat the Cowboys in the NFC championship game in the 80s after Roger Staubach retired. That was one of the three consecutive conference championship games to which Danny White led the Cowboys. Nobody talks about that. The fact at the time there'd never been a quarterback take his team to the championship game in his first 3 years as a starter, but Danny White did that. And they lost them all, fair enough. But it goes back that far. And certainly for the last 10 years, Dan, as you know, the Eagles of those three teams have been the best ones. And that's where the most spirited is. And I will say this. I'm just pausing to make sure that I'm accurate, but I'm pretty sure that Philadelphia is the only one of the three cities where the bus regularly gets egged. If the rivalry is good enough, you can get a lot of grannies doing double bird flips in New York and Washington. It's not New York; it's New Jersey. But every few years, and I'm kind of expecting it Sunday night. The Eagle fans will come with the eggs. So that's one way you can tell that it's a serious rivalry.
I thought it was Halloween, but okay.
Every night's Halloween in Philadelphia.
Hey, Brad, are you shocked that the Cowboys were able to weather the storm? I mean, they're 4-1 right now. Their defense has definitely been the storyline. I would say, over the last month. Cooper Rush has also obviously been in that conversation. But your take on it, on why you think that they've been able to overcome the injury bug?
I'm surprised. I don't know if I'm shocked. They've done a good coaching job as a staff. The coaching job starts with the assembling of the defense. And the defense started to get good last year. That was quite a job Dan Quinn did, coming in, taking a defense that was historically the worst statistically in franchise history and making them one of the better defenses in the league. And then they've built on that this year. They're better than they were. And that's what's allowed them to play to the defense. When you're only giving up one touchdown a game, you don't have to take chances on offense. So, no question, people underestimated Cooper Rush, who's a smart guy. Look at his college career. He had a phenomenal career at Central Michigan. He's a smart, calm guy, perfect demeanor for a backup quarterback, especially. Not real outgoing, but no one has ever seen him rattled. And that's what you want when you're coming in and trying to calm everything down. They didn't have a really good receiver situation at the beginning of the year. It's just marginally better now. But they have not had to take a lot of chances. I see that Bucks jersey and old tangerine pirate helmet over your shoulder. When they opened the season with Tampa, Tom Brady didn't have to be Tom Brady in that game. They ran the ball a lot. Fournette had a great game because Dallas was not offering. That was where Prescott got hurt, and he was terrible before he got hurt. So they were not any offensive threat to Tampa, and Tampa didn't have to open up. They could just run, and Brady didn't have to be Brady. And that's what Dallas has been able to do, in essence, in the last 4 weeks, because Rush has not had to outthrow anybody. They haven't had to outscore anybody. Sooner or later, everything's going to happen, right? Like sooner or later, the Eagles are going to lose a game. Sooner or later, the Cowboys are going to give up more than one touchdown. Sooner or later, they're going to have to open up and play offense a little bit more. And what they're hoping is that when that happens, that Dak Prescott's ready to come back and be the quarterback. Whether that'll be this week or not is a little early to say.
When you look at Micah Parsons on that side of the football, does he have the same impact that Charles Haley had when Haley was on those great Cowboy teams? Do you see the same type of impact?
Well, it's same but different. When the Cowboys got Haley in the summer of '92 in training camp, he was already a great established player. He was feared. I think I could use that word safely with Charles. As a player, he was feared. And he's very Charles. I love him to death, and I've got a great relationship with him. And I'm pretty confident that he would not contradict me if I said that people feared him because he was so erratic off the field. He had medical issues that no one was addressing then. They've been addressed since, but they made Charles unpredictable and fearsome.
Yeah.
So he'd already had back problems. He wasn't quite the player that he'd been in San Francisco, but he's pretty close. And they were a good defense. They'd made the playoffs, won a playoff game the year before. And Jimmy Johnson, as you well know, was the first coach that I can remember to platoon, that's not even the right word, to substitute freely on the defensive line. And he came at you in waves. They did that in 91. Then in 92, what they didn't have was the pass rusher to close it. That's what Charles was. So Parsons is not Haley. He's a different kind of player. The funny thing is they didn't really know that Parsons was that player until DeMarcus Lawrence broke his foot in practice after week 1 last year on Wednesday. And they're getting ready to play the Chargers in Los Angeles. And their most legitimate pass rusher and their defensive leader breaks his foot, and he's going to be out for months. And Dan Quinn, to his credit, looked at it and said, "Hey, Micah, you want to try something completely different this week?" And Parsons said, "Sure." And they basically went into the lab and invented that overnight. Then the dilemma becomes the guy's obviously an outstanding pass rusher, but he's also an exceptional linebacker. And he is a guy who can go sideline to sideline, and that's why they don't limit him to one role. He's just too dangerous. He can do things. He can do a multiplicity of things, all of them better than most other players. So he's different from Haley in that regard. You know, DeMarcus Ware was a phenomenal pass rusher who I hope gets into the Hall of Fame in the next year or so. And Wade Phillips, you know, a great coach and a great guy, one of the best defensive minds ever, but he would drop DeMarcus, and Parcells did the same thing. He would drop him into coverage, you know, from time to time, maybe 25% of the time. I always said any defense they had that had DeMarcus Ware running in the opposite direction of the quarterback, I wasn't too fond of that. And so, like, Lawrence Taylor was never asked to do that, really. He was the outside linebacker. He dropped some, but you always knew where LT was. You don't know where Parsons is. He might line up over the nose. He might line up in the B gap, and then they might stunt. And so you don't, and his explosiveness and strength make him really dangerous. Now they face a real challenge this week in a quarterback who has turned out to be a better passer than most people thought he would, and clearly is the Eagles' best running threat. So one school of thought would say, just tell Parsons where Hurts goes, you go. But if they do that, they might eliminate their best pass rusher half the time. So they're going to have to find a different scheme. Parsons is a difference maker for sure, but he makes a difference in more ways than I would say that Charles did.
Boy, I love what you said about Dan Quinn, and I think this is going to be one of the advantages that the Cowboys have going into Sunday, Brad, is that the coordinator in Dallas is an experienced guy in Dan Quinn, and Jonathan Gannon loves to play that umbrella-type defensive style. Dan's so aggressive, and to hear you say that they basically customized the defense once they figured out who Parsons was, they basically customized the same way Belichick customized the defense for LT, rushing him off the corner as a rush linebacker. I mean, that's pretty great that they saw the guy and said, let's try this. That's really what makes him, I think, an exceptional defensive coordinator.
Well, there's no doubt. But what we'll never know, and thank goodness, is what would have happened if Lawrence had not broken his foot. How would they have used? I don't know that Parsons would have had however many sacks he had last year. He'd have had probably double digits just because he's that good. But all of a sudden, he's a designated pass rush threat in many circumstances, and that was necessity being the mother of invention. And, you know, Dan, one of the things I love about Dan Quinn is he admits to being kind of a mad scientist who likes to go into his own football laboratory with his tape and his brain and try to figure out how to use different pieces. And so I don't think he's done figuring out ways to use Parsons and some of the other players they have. They're really athletic defensively, and they can play a standard nickel, they can play a big nickel, they can play a standard 4-3 base with Parsons, Van Der Esch, and Anthony Barr being the linebackers. That's why they're a good defense. They've got a lot of different kinds of players who they can use in different ways. And I asked Leon Lett, who's their assistant defensive line coach, who was one of those movable pieces on those Super Bowl teams in the early 90s. He was one of the guys that Jimmy and Butch Davis and Dave Wanstedt said, let's, you know, with Russell Maryland and Tony Casillas and Chad Hennings and Tony Tolbert. I asked Leon if this group reminded him at all of that group that he played on. He said yes, and more than any group that has been in Dallas since then. That doesn't mean they're going to win Super Bowls, but they have a lot of depth. They've got a lot of speed. They're smart, and they will cause problems for the other team. So the other team's going to have to be better physically, and the Eagles might be. We'll find out.
Do you agree that one of the issues that you might have a concern with going into this game on Sunday? Give me an update on the O-line, Brad. I mean, For years, that was one of the strengths of the football team. And right now, Zeke is doing around 380 carry. Pollard is really a productive back. I love that they put him in the slot sometimes too. Kellen Moore moves him around a lot because I think they're a little light in the wide receiving core. But is the O-line a concern going into this game against the Eagles on Sunday?
I think it's less a concern than a lot of the public had it being early in the year. You don't lose Tyron Smith and be the same.
Right.
But the young man they drafted to eventually be his replacement, Tyler Smith, who's not related to him, has turned out to be just fine. He's still making mistakes. He found out what it was like to go up against Aaron Donald 4 or 5 times the day. But you know what's great about him is he's a super smart kid. He's really physical. He likes to play. He has a defensive lineman's mentality, and he likes to play right up to the edge, the last echo of the whistle. I was talking to him just last night, as a matter of fact, and he did not know who Mark Tuinei was, but he did know who Eric Williams was. He knew about Eric Williams and what he did and what his demeanor was and how tough he was. And that's what Lane Johnson does for the Eagles. Kelsey's obviously a phenomenal center. And I just think when they're all healthy, which they weren't the other day in Arizona, I think they're the best offensive line in the game. But Lane Johnson, I believe most people would agree, is the guy that he puts the extra little polish on the apple. And so are the Cowboys that? I don't know that they're that, but they're certainly good enough to function. And the Rams are pretty good up front. Washington's really good up front, and they didn't put up any kind of offensive numbers, but they didn't have to because of the offense that they were dealing with. That's the difficulty that the Eagles present, that it's not 5-0 by accident. And what they can do is put stress on you in a variety of ways. So the offensive line, in my estimation, Dan, is good enough, especially with how the defense is playing. Now, whether it'll be good enough Sunday night, that's another question. But I think they can do most of what they want to get done. Zach Martin's still a great guard. Terrence Steele's a young, improving player. I think the center Biotish is vastly improved, and so on the left side they're kind of having to hurry up as they go along. Because it was supposed to be Smith and Smith, and now it's not. And so they're just you do the best you can, and then I would imagine they'll try to beef that up a little bit next year, but. Is it good enough to do what they need to do most of the time? It will be. Elliott's still a tremendous player. He does not have the burst that he did. But Danny, 7 years in, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, he leads all NFL backs in touches in the last 7 years. Now, it would be impossible for him not to have slowed down a little bit. And then he had the MCL injury or the PCL injury last year. So, yeah, he's not as explosive as he once was. And people scream for Pollard. And I would say if you gave Pollard Elliott's workload, you probably wouldn't see the same Pollard. I think they're probably using them the right way. And Elliott's a vastly superior pass protector. So they're good backs. And you have to have a passing game, but I think the offensive line is good enough to accomplish what they need to accomplish over the long haul. They're going to be severely tested this week.
Finally here, Brad, is Mike McCarthy getting enough credit? He gets a lot of heat because obviously it's the Cowboy job. And when you get bounced in the opening round last year, and the first question, Brad, when you guys were in camp, hey, how do you feel about being on the hot seat? And I'm like this. I even text Mike. I go, Jesus, you would have said, hey, how you like Southern California? The weather, right? No, it's like, hey, how do you feel about being on the hot seat? And here he is. I mean, Dan Quinn was kind of his guy. That was kind of his idea to have him brought in there. And, Kellen Moore, he's working well with him. And you know what? As much as we give him hell for, I don't know. I just think that, we're not giving him enough credit for what he's doing with that team. Is that fair?
Yeah, I do think it's fair, especially in this past month and going back into this off season. And I think that he's beginning to get some of that credit here. I will say this. He hired Dan Quinn after he hired Mike Nolan. And, Mike has to own the defensive issues that they had in 2020. And all of the head coaches who were new in 2020, that's the empty stadium COVID year for people with really short memories, which is most of the people we talk to all the time. 2020, that defense was really bad. And Mike has to own that. And now then, to his credit, he then went in a completely different direction. And it's by his choice that Kellen is the offensive coordinator, and he might be a little bit more involved with that this year. But he absolutely gets credit for hiring Quinn. What he mostly, I think, should be getting credit for right now is knowing his team. He looked at them in the offseason. He saw what they brought in. They've always been, when I say they, I'm talking about McCarthy, his staff, Will McClay and personnel, Stephen Jones and Jerry. For the last several years, they've known a little bit more about their players than we have in our business, and certainly the fans who think they know everything. So nobody said anything when they signed J-Ron Curse last year until he turned out to be something that they could never have imagined that he was going to be. And now they have, they took a chance on Malik Hooker, who'd blown out his knee. Well, now it kind of looks like Ohio State Malik Hooker a little bit. And they have put together, I think, the best safety room they've had. I'm talking about all of them. But I mean, I think you might have to go back to Charlie Waters and Cliff Harris and Randy Hughes for this kind of. So they get credit for that. They get credit for knowing their team. I think that he is now beginning to get credit for having a handle on what his plan is, what he wants to do, how to implement it. His players seem to love him, and they really respect him. And as you well know, being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys is like being the head coach at Notre Dame or Texas or the manager of the Yankees, or you're as good as your last series of downs. And what didn't exist when you were playing, what didn't exist was Twitter, which is the vehicle. So all of social media, the vehicle for literally hundreds of thousands of coaches who should be coaching instead of selling insurance or tires or whatever they're doing. They know more than the coaches. And some of them are in our line of work, and some of them but they're all out there every day. And so they express themselves because it's America. And that makes it harder. I think that if you've got a high profile job, I think it really does make it harder.
Absolutely. Hey, Brad, have a great call on Sunday. I so appreciate you always finding time for me. I will make sure I tell Steven on Thursday you said hi. Michael Irvin's coming on this week too.
And Merrill, you got Merrill coming on. This is the second program we've been on back to back to get today. So the other one was a TV show in Philadelphia. So Merrill and I, between us, have been doing our jobs 90 years combined. I'm not exaggerating.
That's insane. Awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. It beats a sharp stick in the eye.
Absolutely. Have a great call. Thanks you so much, Brad.
All right, pal.
The legendary voice of the Dallas Cowboys. How about what he said too about Dan Quinn formulating a defense to figure out the skill set of Micah Parsons? I really love that. That's what makes Dan Quinn. Dan, don't forget, Dan was also up in Seattle, also at the time too, man. So I love it, man. Very cool. The Seth Joyner Show brought to you by JAKIB Sports. Thank you, Brad. Hey, very cool, man. Oh, okay. Oh, Jay, okay. Now I know why. All right. Hey, Xander. Okay, got it, man. Glad I could be part of it. Very cool. All right. Merrill Reese will join us in hour number 3 at 5:30. So we will have the legendary voice of the Eagles as well. Hit the like button. I want to talk a little bit more about Dan Quinn, what he's doing with Micah Parsons. And get this, what Jonathan Gannon doesn't have the propensity to do. There lies that could be the difference in the game on Sunday. I'll explain. Hey, don't forget, our good friends at Morgan & Morgan want to tell you this. If you're hurt or injured on the job ever, there's only one law firm for you to go to. That is Morgan & Morgan. With over 800 attorneys and offices in Philly, New York, and in Florida, there's only one place that will protect your family's rights. If you are hurt or injured on the job, there's no case too small, no fender benders. They're never going to do this. They'll never be intimidated, and they'll never look at a case and go, that's too small. Every case is an important case to Morgan & Morgan. Call them at 800-512-1600. That's 800-512-1600. The call is free. The consultation's free. And when you call Morgan & Morgan, tell them Big Sil sent you.
Many times when people are injured at a place of business, they don't realize they may have a case. The fact is, injuries should not happen. And most of the time when someone is injured, someone is at fault. Maybe the store manager installed a cheap, slippery floor, or there wasn't proper security. After an injury at a hotel, restaurant, store, or any place of business, it's so important to call us. Time matters, size matters. Morgan & Morgan, for the people.com.